And we're recording.
Welcome to the Helm developer call. It is September 13th, 2018. A reminder that anything that this call is recorded, anything you say may be used against you. Start with announcements. Does anyone have anything? There's nothing on the dock.
I can announce something quickly. So the Helm 2.11 release candidate number 2 was released yesterday. So if anyone's willing to help test that out, that would be much appreciated. That's about it. Release notes and everything else can be found in the usual spots for that.
Awesome. I don't know who's. I think that's you for notes, actually. Yeah. Yeah, I think another thing is the governance vote passed, and nominations are out right now. All right. If nothing else, stand up. Michelle?
Yeah, I was issue Sherpa, so I did some issue triaging this week, and I also worked on a proposal a little bit last week, but more so this morning on having an auto rollback flag on Helm upgrade or install. Oh, sorry, upgrade. But anyways, it's a work in progress, so I just have the HackMD link there in case you want to follow along, but it's like really rough right now, and I'm just getting a handle on how to explain the problem generically enough. And then I'll probably ping Adam and Fisher to continue working on those things on that because we had touched base about it like 2 weeks ago. So that's where I'm at. Fisher, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So the last week, mostly what I've been working on is just kind of winding down on the Helm 2.11 issue triaging list. Just making sure that the issues go through. There were a couple of design decisions that were being done in some of the pull requests that were a little bit interesting. So but it was 90% of the way there. So I took the PRs, rebased them, and just did a little bit of finagling with them to whip them up into shape. And they were ready to go. So we managed to push those through and get into a 2.11 release candidate state. So that's what I'm going to be doing this week, just testing it. And if nothing, I imagine if nothing comes out by today, tomorrow, or Monday, then perhaps like a Tuesday 2.11 release might sound like a good time to go through. Love to get what other people's ideas are on that, if anyone's found any issues or whatnot. But that's what I'm primarily going to be focused on, is continuing to go down the 2.11 list. Go Adam.
Yeah, not too much to report. I've been working on some of the Helm details around the using a CRD. So just been focusing on that, and going to continue on that next week. I'm going to be out of town next week, so I'm going to miss stand-up next week as well. Go Farina.
All right, so I've spent most of my time this week in the charts repository getting the DCO labeling stuff fixed and removing security error in there and some other things that were wrong with it. So it's cleaned up and we've got DCO labeling. I also put the chart testing image up on Quay. That's what we use for the charts repo, but we're trying to get it a little bit more broadly used. And I added long-term metrics archival, but the discussion on that is actually in the discussion topics. And I'm working on putting together a blog post to tell people about it and show them what to do with it. Hopefully to come out sometime early next week on the Helm blog. Those have kind of been my big things. I'm going to be switching over to the distributed chart stuff here in the near future. To try and get that ball rolling pretty quickly here. And that's me. Brian.
Yeah, I've just been continuing on with the Lua implementation for Helm 3, and I have a few opcodes to finish up and some cleanup to do, but otherwise everything's on track and it's looking good. Josh, do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. Closed a few Chart Museum PRs this week, hoping to have a new release next week. Also, still looking into authentication authorization flow. All right. So I think that's everyone on the call. Discussion. There was something I brought up last week about chart packaging system improvements, and Gintas, who I don't think he's on the call actually. But basically, there's a link in the doc. I'll put it here too. But basically, it's about caching dependencies and also adding a group ID to charts in order to solve dependency issues. So did anybody have a look at that or have any comments on that?
I didn't see it yet, but what dependency issues is it trying to solve?
So I just put a link, but basically, from what I understand, like if you have a Kafka chart that's developed by two different vendors, I guess, you may call the chart name Kafka company 1 or Kafka company 2, and that becomes your dependency. So instead, it's adding some of this. It looks a little bit Java specific, so we can kind of come up with our own thing for this, but essentially it's saying that the chart name is no longer like the only unique identifier.
Okay, so it's like namespacing it. Kind
of, yeah.
Okay.
And then the second part of this is the caching. So if you have, instead of having requirements YAML having URLs or chart repo references in them, it would basically have this new group plus chart name plus chart version. And if that's found somewhere locally in a cache, then we're using that. So every time we run Helm package or Helm dependency update, we're not going over the internet every single time.
So I have a bunch of thoughts on this. Right. So what, for example, one of our workflows is where somebody takes something like a community chart and then they fork it and then they keep it themselves and then maybe they modify it. Right. And from there, you're maintaining a fork. So if they don't change the version name here, like the com.whatever in here, and then they increment it and they save their own version in that forked version. And then the community charts come out with the next version of this. Now, which one ends up in the cache because they didn't change the name? Because if you look anywhere in the cache for something with that identifier at that version and somebody forked it and they didn't update it, and now what's in the cache? Which one of the two? The forked version, the upstream one? Which one ends up in the cache and gets used?
Right, and maybe that's where the group ID comes in though. Like if you fork it, that group ID would somehow be updated, I guess.
But what if you don't? That's my point here. Because
well,
right now
you're not utilizing the system.
No, but I mean, you got to make it easy for folks, right? Because user experience, people just fork it and then they just start going and doing their own thing. They don't necessarily say, oh, I need to go do this. And so right here, I see a common UX mistake of somebody not following a non-obvious rule. Right? And so now you've got a UX mistake and your cache is polluted because of it. Or potentially polluted because you didn't follow UX. So that's the kind of thing that makes me look at this and go, I'm nervous about doing it this way when it comes to caching this way, because there's a potential to not know something and not realize something, and then pollute your cache and not realize it, and then try to trace that. And maybe your cache locally isn't polluted, but maybe in something like your CI environment, it gets polluted. And so now you've got a non-easily reproducible cache pollution because you didn't change a name somewhere that wasn't obvious that you needed to do, right?
Right.
Right. Caching's hard. And so that's the kind of situation I'd want to try to avoid with something like this.
Well, I don't think the solution is no cache.
No, I'm not saying it's no cache. I'm saying the way we do it and couple it to the name here. It's not like you do it this way or you don't do anything at all, right? The question becomes, how do we do cache?
Right.
Do it well?
Yeah, and the reason I asked him to put it in HackMD is because if we put it straight to GitHub, it would be all over the place. So feel free to add comments like this in here if you have any time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways of doing it. First, you don't need to have an identifier like this in order to do it. We could probably pick a hashing version that's pretty unique on things, and then run a hash on the cache chart, and then use a store of that kind to know what to do with what, and then map it to that, right? To say, oh, is it in the cache?
Yeah, I think part of it though is also if you have like project A, project B, and project B relies on project A, I think what the individual is doing today is having in requirements YAML like // file something pointing to the other project. So that might be changing, the hash in that might be changing, and he doesn't want to lock that down in requirements. He just wants to be able to do like a Maven build or something, and it just grabs everything from no matter where it is on his file system. I don't know.
Yeah, but so when it comes to caching though, right, we've already got die adjusts for charts, right? So we know the die adjust of a chart version. So we could use that as a cache identifier to say, okay, we think we've got this chart. Is the die adjust right? I'm trying to figure out what we need with the change in the naming convention in order to institute some form of caching. Because I think we've got caching, and we probably have identifiers and things here we can use today. What does the new versioning or the new naming scheme give us? Besides something that's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more, I mean, this is very Java, right? But if you look at every other system out there that people are using that's popularized, they're not going to this level of complication as the Java style, right?
Okay.
Go look at Homebrew, go look at NPM or Yarn or Composer. There is a certain amount of namespacing here, but you get that when you use repositories and you've got a repository / a chart version, or if it's in a Git repository, you know where it's at, right? So adding the extra to the identifier, I'm not seeing which particular problems it solves. And if we're using it just to have a more cacheable identifier, I see some issues with the way people just in practice in our community do forks. That causes an issue, but I think we also have other metadata there that we could use instead in order to populate a cache.
Okay.
Is there a good write-up of the particular problem they're trying to solve?
Yeah, he's going to put together a GitHub repo with sample code, saying like, this is why he basically had to write a custom Gradle something to fix what this would fix.
But I mean, that's getting into implementation. Is there like a human readable description of the problem at the core of it they're trying to solve, not his particular type of solution?
Yeah, that's in the hack MD.
Well, what's the problem? Because I see a solution, which is a change to the versioning system, decoupling charts from repositories for caching. These are solution-based things, right? Like, what is the underlying problem that's trying to be solved here? Is it we need to get to caching? I'd totally buy that.
What I'm seeing it's that the dependency is coupled to a chart repository.
So he wants the dependency coupled to something else?
Well, I think just the ability to if you downloaded it already to get it from the file system. I don't know. Here, we're running on time. I will,
So yeah, Josh, like
yeah.
instead of trying to solutionize it, if we could get like a description of the problem, because I have a
Yeah.
few ideas here, and there might be simpler ways to get to this that aren't such a drastic change if we know what the problem is, because the style of solving the problem is very Java here, which isn't Go, which isn't like many of the other popular package managers were modeled after,
Yes.
right? But if we know the problem without it being put into an implementation, then that might help us craft a simple solution that's less invasive, but gets him to where he's at. Like if he just wants to be able to say, get it from the file system, get it from a cache, and then we can look at, those are the kinds of things we'd want to know to help us come up with a solution that maybe more fits our style rather than try to fit this particular implementation. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I will reach out and get a better problem statement so we can move forward without just this is what we should do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I've got ideas. Like on caching, I would love to see the caching. And on repositories, and how do we deal with repositories and versions and maybe pull something from somewhere else? I've got ideas, and we'd want to do those kinds of things too, especially if one of the popular ways that people do it isn't to use repositories, but is to just stick all your charts into Git. And then now, how do you deal with those builds and those kinds of things?
Yeah.
There might be something we can even look at there. I've got ideas on that, but they don't model this at all. And they're less invasive end user changes. They're more behind the API kind of changes that we could do.
Okay. All right. I'll try to follow up on that. But in the interest of time, the next thing on the discussion is, I think, you as well, Matt. Chart testing in Quay.io.
Yeah, so chart testing is what we've been using on the community charts repo. We originally had a testing setup, and then we've just kept adding stuff to this setup, right? We added things like verifying version increments, schema validation on chart YAML files, all kinds of stuff. So we could automate out all these manual tests that we were doing and doing poorly, with different folks on the charts repository. Well, it became useful enough, we want to share it with a wide variety of people because, quite frankly, you could stick it in your own CI system and do whatever you want with it, right? You could stick it in your own CI system, run it yourself. You could have it in your development workflow in the community charts. There's lots of other places you could do it. So Reinhard went off and turned it into a chart testing repository that just is a standalone. We have it as a Docker image in Quay now. And we want to share this with other folks because you could stick it in your own Circle CI and just use it, right? And in doing so, the reason we chose Quay was metrics. If you use hub.docker.com to get it, what you end up with is just a counter. You don't know what the usage is over time. Is it growing? Is it shrinking? You don't get access to this stuff to pull it off and say, look at trends or find other information. And so that was one of the things that interested us about Quay because we have access to a whole lot more data. And so that's what got us to Quay, but there's two kinds of data in Quay. There's aggregate data for a day, which looks at the different types of events, such as an image pull, an image push, configuration update, and you can look at how many times those happened, and it's just aggregate data. So like in that case, we're most likely interested in each day's image pull count and being able to get to that. And so, back up. Quay only stores the data accessible to you for about a month, then they dump it to S3 because it's records every request, right? And so we want to back it up because you don't have unlimited version history for all of this data. We want to stick it somewhere where we can look at the trends over a long period of time. So we're going to stick it in object storage. So by getting this, we started by grabbing the aggregate, but it also has detailed information. And so I could go grab all of the requests on everything for the day, but man, does it contain information. Right? I could say, ooh, here was this logged in user at this IP address who pulled this image at this time of day. Now, that's a whole lot of information, and it gets into, the European data protection laws. It gets into, how do we hold on to this and what do we do with it and how do we share it? So in my original go at it, I just didn't touch that. I just grabbed the aggregate data rather than anything else. But I wanted to ask what folks think, because we might put other images up here. There was even talk of sticking Tiller up here, so we could pull information out of Tiller as people come up to new versions. Whatever we end up doing, sticking other things up here and getting data on it. So I wanted to chat and just get what people think. I think I'm okay with the aggregate data, but what do other folks think? It just, the level of detail in the combined data should probably be sanitized if we ever kept it.
Yeah. Do we have any from the CNCF? Do we have any policy on retaining data on users or anything like that? For, I guess, like devstats.cncf.io, there's that kind of information and whatnot. Do they have any policies on that kind of information?
That's
Because
a
that might
question.
influence this. That might influence this answer.
That's true. Let me, that's a great question. I wish I had thought of it. Good job, Matt. I will fire off a message to our CNCF counterparts to see what they have to say about it.
Okay. From my opinion, though, I think it would be better to have the aggregate data just to be a little bit on the more protective side of not retaining so much personal information, if that's such a big concern. I think, honestly, what internally at Microsoft, what we're interested in looking at is like trend lines, rather than just like looking at deep down aggregate data on things that happened on this. We're looking at like general trends on what's happening over in the Helm organization and like how many times Tiller's being installed and that kind of stuff. So not looking for deep data necessarily.
Yeah, and in addition to that too, like too much data can be crippling, and it can start to become a little skewed when you have too much information to look at. So it might be better just to do the aggregate.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go ask. One of the things that I did with the public chart downloads and things like that was to look at the number of unique IP addresses, and even that level of detail would be stripped out, but that's probably okay.
Matt, if we move the chart museum Docker to Quay, can this chart apply to that as well?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, quite frankly, the way this runs is there is a container that runs a cron job once a day, pulls the data from one place and sticks it in another. That's it. So you can apply it to anything. It's pretty general purpose. It does stick it in Azure blob storage today.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's all. I wanted to bring this up publicly. I'll let you know what I find from talking with Dan and Chris on the topic. That's it.
Cool. Got 3 minutes until the end. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up before we do assignments?
Yeah. Hi, I am working now from JFrog, and Travis, he was working on indexing for repository parser. So I would like him to jump in quickly. He already opened the issue for that.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Travis. I've been working on the indexing for Helm 3, making it more like efficient, and
The partitioning?
not the partitioning. What I've been doing is looking into JSON parsers, trying to find an optimal one. I ended up writing one myself, and I wanted to just bring up my what I've been doing, basically, to hopefully get some feedback on it. from the community.
Do you have a link, since we're running low on time, do you have a link that we can throw in the,
Yeah.
in
So
the notes?
it's
So
on
in
GitHub.
in
It's community
chat
issue.
already.
What?
I already dropped it to a chat.
I see that. Okay. Issue 49.
Yeah, issue 49.
I saw this. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to bring it up to maybe give it a little more, just to see if I can get some feedback from some of the community. That's it.
Yeah, no. Thank you for putting this together. I was waiting to see what you came up with, and I haven't had a chance to look at the PR since you updated it yesterday.
Mhm.
I'll definitely go take a look at this.
Cool.
Curious to see how it goes because, even breaking up the JSON or the index up into multiple files, we still have to deal with cases of people using things like CI workflows and the stuff getting pretty big, and looking for ways to deal with performance and especially memory around this. I'm interested in, so we don't bloat up these container runtimes we're running Helm in.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Cool.
All right. So assignments for next week. Moderator. Anyone volunteer?
Sure.
Okay. Note taker
I can be note taker.
and issue Sherpa.
I could do it this week.
Cool. All right. That concludes this Helm developer call. See you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, bud.